It's ding ding, two men in a ring. We put pride in your stride and a quiver in your liver. You want 'em, we've got 'em, coming to you. Loud and proud, he's the biggest, he's the baddest. It's Mr. Gavin Davis on the Gavin Davis Podcast Show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Gavin Davis Podcast featuring my co-host, Dave Brough. So tonight, Dave's going to lead the podcast. We're going to go through a number of things. I just want to first give out a mention to our sponsors. So we got House of Jiu-Jitsu in Cyprus. We got Clarity Valeting and Detailing, Kevin Mauer Driveways, Matt's Barbershop, Josie's Chippy, Sambach Judo Club, The Grappler's Gift, Craig Stanton, for all your gis, rash guards, anything like that. Rob Sandler Consulting and Construction, and Knutsford Jiu-Jitsu Club. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass you over to Dave, and he's going to lead tonight's podcast with me.
Well, thanks, Gav. First of all, massive congratulations on achieving your black belt in BJJ. And I wonder if we could start with that, Gav. Could you tell us, when you went to Cyprus, did you have any inkling that you were going to get this award?
No, I didn't, to be honest with you. I thought that maybe that I was potentially going to get it maybe at the RAF Champs, which is in March. Because I spoke to Paddy about when I was going to eventually get my black belt, and I always wanted it off either Konstantinos, Kev Capel, or Paddy, because over the last 8 years, they're the ones that have spent the time with me, developing me and everything. So I thought maybe it might come in March, but apparently I should have had it last summer. That's what Konstantinos was saying, and because of circumstances, I didn't get it. So, to be fair, mate, I'm just happy. I was just happy to be back on the mats at Hodge last week, out in Cyprus with all the guys and girls. It was just really good, and yeah, just happy that I can now just enjoy my training. You know what I mean? I don't feel like there's any pressure on me whatsoever.
And I know this is, I mean, I know it meant a huge amount to you, because this has kind of been quite a journey to get here, hasn't it? When did you start? Was it the moment you saw UFC 1? Was that the beginning of your journey, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I watched that. That came out November 13th, 1993, UFC 1. I probably watched it around 94. Cousin got hold of some tapes, watched them. So I was about 9-10 years of age then. And I just feel that, when I look back on them videos now, like how that inspired me so much as a young lad. And it's, to be fair, inspired the whole world, what Hoist Gracie did that night. And then what he did at UFC 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. But I think the grappling, I really got in. See, when I was a kid, I thought I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I thought I was doing what Hoist was doing, but I wasn't. I was doing Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. And then once I started getting more switched on, as I became a teenager and an adult, I feel that I really, really started training properly in the grappling when I was about 17, 18. So it's a 20-year journey. It's took me 20 years. Obviously, you know as well as I do, I'm a martial artist anyway. I've trained multiple disciplines and I've covered a lot of ground over the years. But yeah, I've spent 20 years. I spent 8 years solely concentrating on the gi. So I was a blue belt 2015 officially. I had a lot of success at blue belt, purple belt, and so on. But all the no-gi grappling I did through my MMA days as well. The grappling I was doing, even in the traditional element of what I was doing years ago. I was very grappling heavy. So it's taken me 20 years.
So I know you've done a huge amount of stuff, and I guess the grappling kind of side really also complemented the MMA you were doing. And the kickboxing. Was it kickboxing or Thai boxing you did?
Thai boxing.
Thai boxing,
yeah.
Right. Okay, so they're quite a nice match for each other, aren't they? Because you've got the striking, the elbows and the knees and so on. In terms of a martial art for fighting, for self-defense, do you think you need to marry the grappling with the striking art?
If you're going to compete, definitely. If you're going to compete, like I've touched on before, my striking was never my stronghold whatsoever. You know, if I could turn back the clock, I would have done boxing as a child as well. I think, you know, your boxing, your stand up is massively important. I think if you like me now, you know, I'm nearly 40. I just enjoy the grappling aspect of it. I feel for longevity, the impact on my body. You know, if I get in a bad spot, I can just tap out. So I just feel as I'm getting older, the more grappling I do, and is just helping me. Whereas, you know, through my MMA days, especially when I was at elite, I would be sitting in the bath at night, holding my head in my hands with massive headaches from the shots I'd taken. Like, you know what I mean? My head would be pounding from the sparring and that. And I think there's only a certain time frame you can do that for. And I knocked it all on the head at 30 when I joined the RAF. So I come in from training now. Yeah, I could be fatigued and tired, but I don't feel like I used to when I was sparring 2 or 3 nights a week when I was competing full pro MMA. So to answer your question, I think if you're going to compete and you're going to compete at a high level, you definitely need the stand up. If you want it from a self-defense point of view, you need to understand stand up and you need to have your basics. You don't need to be a world-class boxer. But for where I am now, I feel that I just want to continue doing what I'm doing and keep developing my jiu-jitsu. I feel that's where I'm strongest. That's what I enjoy the most. And I'm just happy doing it.
So we're talking Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but your background in traditional jiu-jitsu as well, where there are strikes and there are other aspects. Do you see you developing that from this point, or is it solely going to concentrate on the BJJ?
I haven't really thought about it, to be honest with you. I thought years ago my number was up with it, and it was only because of being with John Idle in Cyprus and John inspiring me to do my third Dan that we trained for 2 years doing that. And then obviously I helped him with the BJJ. I started teaching him the groundwork, but I don't feel that I've got, because I'm back at Benson now and John's in Cyprus and then he's going to be coming back to Ban Aldswick. I don't feel that I've got anyone to train with in that environment that can push me on for a fourth Dan. And then you've got to keep on top of your conditioning with your arms, your break falls, your throws. It's if you're going to do it to the standard that I want to do it, it's not easy to keep that level of conditioning. So unless I can be around someone like John or yourself on a regular basis where I can say, right, once a week or twice a week we're going to concentrate on that for a couple of hours and over a period of time develop towards a fourth Dan, I would go, yeah, I wouldn't put it out the question. But I just don't think it's possible at the moment for me to say, yeah, I'm going to do a fourth Dan, because I haven't got that training partner like I had.
No, it's a good point. It's because we're in traditional. I mean, we've had this conversation. I don't know why we call it traditional.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's, as far as I can tell, it's westernized British jiu-jitsu system.
Yeah.
I think we call it traditional because we don't know what else to call it, but we could just call it British, because that's where, you know, the syllabus was devised in Liverpool and it tooled in lots of different other things.
Yeah.
So with my training now, where I've been, you know, cross training quite a lot, I don't actually know what I would do for a fourth Dan in traditional. because there's a lot of like things like the Okinawa and Kobudo and stuff. Well, that chapter for me is that's closed now.
Yeah.
That's not the direction I would take it. So
Mm.
for me, progressing, I well, obviously maybe somebody like John could advise, but at the moment there isn't a clear path for that.
Yeah. So I don't like the fact that we pick what we can do on a grading either. I think that should come from above, and like that should, like for my third dan, for example, John got in touch with Paul, and Paul put a syllabus in place, and then it was a little bit heavy with a couple of katas, and then John phoned him back up or messaged him and said, listen, can we change a couple of the katas, because Gav's more grappling based, more hands-on based than kata based, and we went with that. But the overall syllabus was from Paul and Phil. I didn't just create what I wanted to do that day, because to be fair, it had been all grappling based. And it did test me to a certain degree, because it'd been 17 years since I'd been in that environment. And to go in front of a panel after 17 years and put pressure on yourself to have a good pace, to get your technique right. Yeah, it wasn't easy. I know a lot of people have easier gradings today. I'm not going to beat about the bush. There's people out there that get really looked after with gradings. I don't want to be one of them. I'm quite happy being an excellent white belt. You know what I mean? I do this because I love it. I get up in the morning to go and train and do my jiu-jitsu. I'm happy being an excellent white belt than a poor black belt. And when Konstantinos gave me my black belt, which is right here, when he gave me that, he said it was an honor to put it on my waist. And I said to him it was an honor receiving it off him. Obviously, because I've got a lot of time for Konstantinos, but I spent 20 years night in, night out. Not so much now. I don't train as intense and as much now as what I used to. Okay. But over the last 20 years, there's been years where I've gone out 5-6 nights a week in all weathers. Whether I'm 100% well, I'm going training. And just because I love it and that's what I want to do. So, the sacrifice and the dedication is one thing. And then I'd hope to think that, I'm actually fairly good at it as well. Do you know what I mean? The big problem I have is my size. It's so difficult. And I want to stress this to people. When you're 60 kilo and you're my size, it is so difficult going night in, night out to fight and train with lads who are 80, 90, 100 kilo, when you're having your arm put in an arm bar, you're having Kimuras put on you, you're getting choked out, you're getting your legs ripped off, and then you've got to come back the next night to train. It's so disheartening. Do you know what I mean, Dave? It's so hard when, like, the amount of times I've drove home wishing I was 100 kilo. So there's parts of that I've developed, a very small man jiu-jitsu, and a lot of people say, oh, Gav's very technical. Well, a lot of the time I was just trying to survive. Obviously now being a higher belt on the mat, I'm, with white belts and blue belts and that, I don't have any dramas unless you get an exceptional blue belt who's a competition blue belt who's heavier than me. That they can be a nightmare for anyone, but it's a 20-year journey. Paddy had the same when we had Paddy on the podcast. He was a blue belt for 11 years. He's like me. He just wants to go train. He just enjoys it. He loves it. But it's when you get the belts, there's nothing better than getting the belt off someone you respect and someone who you admire and like who actually helps you and develops you.
Did you feel that is that a difference from the other martial arts you've done with BJJ, that those kind of relationships you've had with your coaches in BJJ you haven't had or is it, it's just a different kind of philosophy, is it, compared to the traditional, would you say?
Yeah, I've had good relationships with everyone I've trained with, really. I think it's just a different philosophy. I think it really is. Like Konstantinos, we're going to get Konstantinos on the podcast at some stage. He'll tell you now his body is not in a good place. He's got issues with his knees. He had a massive op a few years ago. He's got a shoulder problem. You know, if he comes sparring on a Saturday, he's suffering for a week. So that was always in the back of my head. I always wanted to be a black belt and actually have my body not broke and actually be able to enjoy being a black belt and be able to be on the mats every night of the week and enjoy stuff and enjoy my sparring. Whereas a lot of people, they get to a black belt and they're broken. I never really wanted that in the back of my mind. So I've always had good relationships with people I've trained with. You know, I was with Andy Price for a long time. And I was with Richard Cosgrove for a long time, and Mick and all the guys there at Elite. You know, Ian Williams I trained with for years. Daryl, you know, they became more training partners than a sensei, so to speak. But I think the difference is with the BJJ is that it's, you know, they actually will have a roll with you, and they'll have a go with you, and then it's not like who's got the biggest penis competition. You know what I mean? It's very like, oh, Gav, you need to work on this, you need to change this, you need to look at this, you know, and you become, and I do the same for others. I try to help people as much as I can. And I think that the BJJ is very heavy with that, more probably than the traditional. I think the traditional is, you'll do a technique, and there is coaching there, there is progression there. People want to improve you, but I don't think the hands-on approach is as much as what it is in BJJ. Would you agree with that as well? Because you've obviously crossed over a bit now.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think I definitely would. I think it's because they're different. They're different. The way the training's conducted is different. So
yes,
in judo or in BJJ, the training is continuous against a resisting opponent. Most of the techniques are then developed in that environment.
yes,
And if you can't make the technique work in that environment, you just have to keep improving it. And the coaching is around helping you develop that better. Whereas in the traditional, based on my experience, a lot of the teaching has been more kata based without that application against a resisting opponent. So if it looks good, kind of thing, then that's all right, but you don't actually develop it in a context where you have a live opponent. So I think probably the feedback you're getting in the more competitive arts is probably more real-time improvements in a meaningful way, as opposed to something that, yeah, that's good, that looks enough to pass this aspect of that part of the skill. And I think something I've thought about as well, Gav, is if you're practicing, you know, we talked about the kata-based learning, we talked about it with Claire. If you're practicing a skill in that environment, so you're blocking a punch and you're doing a throw with a compliant uke, and you do that 10,000 times, okay?
yeah,
And your uke lets you do that 10,000 times. If there are mistakes within that, you never, and they're not obvious, but you never learn them. You never learn those mistakes because your uke is completely compliant.
yeah,
Whereas if you are trying to throw somebody in a randori and they're moving it, you know, they're moving and they're resisting, if there are mistakes with your technique, it just doesn't work. And so you get that feedback. It's instantaneous feedback. So I kind of think, and it depends on whose class you're in, right? Because different coaches will develop the techniques differently. I kind of think that's, that is definitely one of the differences where, judo's, it's basically learning in randori, BJJ, you're learning a lot in rolling. And that's where a lot of the learning's done, is when you're with a live opponent.
No, I think you're right there, mate, because obviously I was driving when I was still doing my traditional and my Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I feel that I never drove home once thinking, having my mind playing tricks on me, because every technique I did was a good technique. And if it wasn't a good technique, I could just, because I had a compliant hockey and a training partner, I could just change the position of my hip slightly. And then I was like, yeah, I got that. Whereas in BJJ, and I'd imagine it's similar in judo, you don't get that. The amount of times I've drove home and I've been like, I'm crap at this. Do you know what I mean? I cannot stop him doing that Kimura, for example, or stop him doing this to me. Do you know what I mean? And that starts playing mind games with you. And then this is why people get the jiu-jitsu bug, because it gets in the head. And yeah, I've had it many a time, whereas I never really had that mind, that mind battle when I was doing the jiu-jitsu traditional, because I think there wasn't as much adversity in my training. Whereas like every night, like I guarantee now that I'll go down to South Morton tomorrow night with Simon, and I guarantee there'll be 30 lads there, right? White belt to brown belt. And they'll all want to tap out a black belt. I guarantee it. They'll be queuing up, right? I finish rolling with one. I have a 1 minute rest. The next one's like, you ready to go, Gav? It keeps you on your toes. And then when you do get tapped out, okay, and then it's a repeated thing that you get tapped out with the same thing, that's what gets in your head. That's what gets in my head anyway. Because then I stop everything. I go, I've got to address this. I've got to look at what I'm doing wrong here, and I've got to sort this out ASAP. So then Aaron Aby talked about it in the podcast, because me and Aaron did the same coaching degree. We did sports coaching. So then you look at reflection on action and reflection in action. So it's reflective practice to so that the next night that you're developing, and that you've got it in your mind what you want to work on and how you want to take it forward. And I've been doing that for a long time now.
I think it's there has to be a balance as well, because the competition, and we talked about it with Robert Drysdale, didn't we?
Yeah.
The more sportified something becomes, the less of a fight it is, and the more of a game. And certainly, when you're talking about Olympic judo, it's a sport. BJJ is a sport, and they're combat sports, and you're learning to fight, but you're learning to win a game. So there has to be for it to be an effective martial art, in the sense that if this is going to protect you on a Saturday night when you're out and somebody starts on you, there has to be some element of violence, I suppose, or dealing with violence. So how do we, I think we might have mentioned it in the previous podcast. Do martial arts cater for that now? Can that be catered for within?
Mate, I don't think the world caters for violence no more, because the world's changed a lot the last 20 years. When I started drinking, it's put it this way, right? When I was a young lad, about 14, 15, we live right across the road, my mum and dad do, from a pub called the Hampden. And me and my mum used to sit on the bed on a Friday night with the window open, the blinds open. We would watch people fighting every Friday and Saturday night outside, right? Alcohol, women, there's always going to be fighting. When I started going out drinking at 17, it was part and parcel of going out. You were probably going to end up in a scrap. Obviously I don't go out now, and I barely drink now. But I think that the world's changed a lot the last 20 years. A lot of it in a good way. I think a lot of it in a bad way. Do martial arts teach violence? No, they don't. Not in my experience. When you start introducing a rule set to something, it becomes a match, not a fight. Okay, the UFC, the MMA, in general, so the UFC and every other organization that runs proper MMA events, that is the closest thing that you will ever get to a street fight legalized. Okay, you get the bare knuckle boxing as well and stuff like that. I'm not really into it. However, that's very similar. But with a bare knuckle boxing, you can't wrestle, you can't take people down. So same again, you're putting a rule set in, so it becomes a match. Okay, if you look at UFC 1, there was 2 rules. There was no biting, no eye gouging. So that's probably the closest thing in history televised that's been a real fight. All right. However, once you, as I said, once you introduce rules, it becomes a match. So BJJ is a match. It's not a fight. It's a game. It's winning a game. Taekwondo, it's a match. It's not a fight. Boxing, it's a boxing match. It's not a fight. People will argue this point, okay? But it's not a fight because in a fight, the first thing I'm going to do, if I'm at distance, I'm going to leg kick you. Okay? You can't do that in boxing. Yeah? You know, that the first, what's the first thing people do in a fight normally if they're within a foot of each other? They headbutt each other. There's no UFC, in the early UFCs, headbutts were allowed, but there's no martial art out there that allows headbutts for obvious reasons, yeah? Because it does massive damage, but it works in a street fight. It works in a fight. So when people say, "Oh, I've got a jujitsu fight on this weekend," they mean well, and in their mind, it's a fight, but I believe it's a match. You know, it's a competitive match. Because as I say, I've seen some terrible things in fights. You know, I got hit with a dog chain once. You know, I was in a place I shouldn't have been. Someone started yapping at me. And then next thing I turned around and I got hit with a dog chain. That there's no self-defense in the world or any martial art that prepares you for that. Luckily enough, I got my hands up. And otherwise, I think I'd have lost my eye, but I got caught right here. And I was going to pick my new car up the next day. So, you know, when I got up the next day, my mum and dad were like, "Oh, what's the matter with your eye?" "Oh, I'm all right. I'm okay. I'm fine. Let's go and pick the car up." But yeah, the fighting and martial arts, I think, have gone very away from each other, very sport related. And if you look at Taekwondo, for example, I couldn't tell you the first thing about Taekwondo. Okay, I've watched it. I enjoy watching a little bit of it. Do I enjoy it? Not really. However, it's a very high skill level. The skill level of it's unbelievable. I know people that have trained high level in it, so they do a lot of plyometrics, they do a lot of stretching exercises and that. Great athletes. However, I don't know enough about it to really have an opinion on it. But I would still argue that it's a match, not a fight, because there's a rule set involved.
Okay. So I wonder then if, and some of the way we think about martial arts as a way of fighting, we're protecting ourselves, but actually what we're doing is developing really high level skills, and particular skills that, whether it's traditional or BJJ or judo, you can get very good at a particular skill that may not help you fight necessarily.
I think that, see, this is a very good point now. This is a really good topic. I think that the skills that you learn in your individual art will always help you to a certain degree in a fight. However, the fight, so let's say you only ever do BJJ, right? And in BJJ, you're used to pulling a guard and being on your back. That's your game, okay? Is that going to help you in a street fight? Well, if you end up on your back and someone comes down into your guard, it's going to help you massively. But if you start by a pool table when someone's got a pool cue in their hand, it's not going to help you. Okay, total different environment. Okay, if you are really good at kickboxing and you're separated by 3 or 4 feet and someone's having to go at you, and then you can offload your hands and your leg kicks and your knees and your elbows, that's going to help you massively. But then if that lad takes you down to the floor and you've never grappled, then you're out of your environment. So if the fight that you're in the street fight, crosses over to the environment that you're used to, then the training you've done, the specific training, will be very handy. However, if it doesn't cross over into that environment, I think a lot of it will be wasted.
It's interesting. I'll just go back to a point you made about UFC, and that's MMA is the best martial art for fighting.
Yeah.
And something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently is the role of entertainment in martial arts. How important throughout history was entertaining people in shaping martial arts. And I think MMA is an example where it was developed. It wasn't developed to be an effective martial art. It was developed for a television audience, what the audience thought was going to be an effective fighting system. Because the first UFCs, you had all these different styles coming together to fight each other. And it was that format then that went forward. But if there wasn't a television involved, if there wasn't an audience and money to be made, would MMA exist?
Well, I think it would. I think because Art Davey, who was the chap that went in with Horion Gracie on the original UFC, he said when he was in the Navy, they always used to talk about who would win if a boxer fought a wrestler. Yeah, and when you look back in history, Judo Gene LaBelle, he had an MMA match in like the 50s, right? Then you had Muhammad Ali fought who was the wrestler off the top of my head? Was it Gorilla Monsoon? I think. You know what I mean? They had like a weird MMA match back in the 70s. So I think that debate's always existed, and people have always been fascinated with that debate. With UFC 1, that's what they originally wanted to know. They wanted to know what was the best art in that environment. I personally don't believe BJJ was the best art in that environment, even though it showed it was. Where Royce Gracie had the advantage was because no one else understood what he was doing off his back. No one. And Don Fry said this on his podcast. They had the massive advantage because not one other person there understood. Because this is an interesting thing, because when you're on your back, people think you're losing. People automatically think you're losing. But then when you're able to have a guard and hit a triangle and hit an armbar and hit a Kimura and all these things from a guard, that surprises people who aren't used to it. And I'm not on about white belts. I'm on about people who have never stepped on the mat. Okay? So all them people who Royce Gracie fought at UFC 1. So Art Jemison, he fought UFC 1, was a boxer, right? Fought him, boxer, never ever been on his back, never been on the floor. So he's not even a white belt on the floor. He's not even ever stepped into a class yet. Okay. Then you got his second fight was against Ken Shamrock. Okay. Ken Shamrock just totally underestimated him. Ken Shamrock was more well-rounded than Royce Gracie. Then his third fight was Gerard Gordeau. Gerard Gordeau, same against Savat champion, stand up, hit the floor, never been on the floor in his life. They didn't understand what was going on. Okay. Once people started understanding what was going on with the floor work, so when Dom Fry come in, when Marco Huas come in, okay, and then the time limits killed them. The time limits killed the Gracies. Okay, Elio said once the time limits start coming in, retire, right? But from the UFC, I'm on about in that environment. But when you look at them fighters I've just mentioned, like Dom Fry and that, Shamrock, they were more rounded than what Heist was. Heist was a one-trick pony, and it worked. But once people started understanding what he was doing from the guard, I would have loved to have seen him against Dom Fry. I think that was the fight that I think Dom Fry would have won that fight. I think Dom Fry was to me, Dom Fry was the first proper mixed martial artist in the UFC. And then Marco Ruas come after.
Just going back to the first UFC, so I guess they would have got people who they could have got for that event, but they might not have got necessarily the best person from each discipline, right? So what happens, say, if Mike Tyson is in UFC 1? Is it this? Do you think the result's the same, or is it a different, or are things different?
I think Art Jemison was ranked 7 in the world at welterweight, if I remember correctly. They tried to get the best fighters in the world in their own disciplines. Gerard Gordeau was a multiple-time Savat champion. Legit. As I say, if Mike Tyson would have ended up on the floor with Royce Gracie, the same thing would have happened. Royce Gracie probably would have had his ear bit off, all right? But the same thing would have happened because Mike didn't know and doesn't know what's going on the floor. It's a different world. However, Royce would have had to get him to the floor, which I think he would have. Even if he'd have had to pull a guard, he would have. The not being able to understand the guard was where everyone was going wrong. Once Shamrock understood the guard, you look what happened at UFC 5 when they fought the second time. Shamrock understood the guard a bit better. He had a strategy in place. They went half an hour, and then they went to an 8-minute overtime. And then they said, "Oh, we've got to stop because Heist was getting beat up. Heist's eye was out. Shamrock was winning that fight, and Shamrock would have kept going. He had the cardio for it. And they said it was a draw in the end. But I believe that Shamrock, Dom Fry, Marco Ruas, much more even though Heist was, I say, he's one of my heroes, like what he did, I'm just trying to be honest on the podcast here. You know, I think that when you look at the original lineup of the first 8 people in the UFC, 16, and then it went down to 8 because they did prelims. I think Shamrock was the most well-rounded, personally. I think Shamrock just underestimated Heist, and Heist was just too savvy and too good and just caught him. Do you know what I mean? And then by UFC 5, Shamrock was still in his prime then, and lived and learned. Shamrock was a physical specimen as well. You know, but then again, you've got to give Heist a lot of credit because he was a lot smaller than Shamrock. Shamrock was 220. Heist was about 178, I think. There's nearly 40 pounds there. And Shamrock was 40 pounds of muscle as well. So I think it's an interesting debate, but I don't think whatever boxer you would have put in there that day, if they would have hit the floor, they would have got tapped out. That's how I feel.
Of course. So, I mean, if Tyson manages to connect,
oh yeah,
if Tyson in '93 manages to connect with anyone,
yeah,
then it's the results. It's over, isn't it?
But if Art Jemison would have connected, he would have knocked Ice out. It was the fact that they didn't understand how to sprawl. They didn't understand how to get the hips out. Do you know what I mean? Look what happened to James Toney when he came to the UFC and he fought Randy Couture. They put the 4-ounce gloves on James Toney, and James Toney said to Dana White, "You can't put these on me because I'm going to kill someone if I hit him." And then they matched him with, at the time, one of the best wrestlers in the UFC. And Randy Couture just shot on a single leg, took him down, arm triangled him. Because he didn't know what was going on the floor. And this was UFC 120s. I mean, this was years after. it's, as I say, you got to know how to sprawl. You got to know how to get back to your feet. And this generation of MMA fighters today, they are that well rounded. If you take them down, their jiu-jitsu is black belt level. If you try to take down, rest is world class level. If you try and stand with them, their boxing and their stand up is world class level. So wherever you go with them, it's a bad night at the office. Like,
So if we go back to where you are now, Gav, with the BJJ
yeah,
and competing,
yeah.
are you going to continue competing? Or do you feel you've done that now and you're going to, what's on the horizon for you now in terms of development?
No, I'm definitely going to be competing, mate. I've got what I want to do. I want to get back to doing 2 international ones a year. I haven't done that since before I went to Cyprus. And while I was in Cyprus, I wasn't able to do it. And then the COVID thing hit us. But I want to do a couple of national ones the next 6 months. And then by the end of this year, I want to get, a big comp under my belt. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know what it'll be yet. I've always wanted to do the Masters in this country, the British Masters. I've never been able to do it. I know a number of people that have done it and done quite well at it. So I think that's around October time. I want to definitely get on that. But I love the international events. You know what I mean? Going somewhere, training for a week or two, doing a competition on the weekend, and then flying back. I absolutely adored them. So Konstantinos was saying to me that they're on about going to Vienna in the end of April. I'm going to be looking at potentially getting on that for a comp. I'll have to see what I'm working there. But no, I'm definitely going to get back to it this next month. Because I do miss it, mate. I do miss it. And there's still a lot I want to achieve, like I've never done the Euros. So I'd love to do the Euros at some stage. I'd love to do like the English and the British Opens again, because I've got both gold in them, and I'd love to like medal or get gold in them again at black belt level. So I've still got things that I want to achieve,
How do you anticipate the level changing now between competing as a brown belt and competing as a black belt? Do you think you're going to need time to adjust to the level, or do you think there's a big difference?
I think where I'm going to struggle is that because my weight is 61 kilo, so by the time I put the gi on, I fight under 64, which is light featherweight. I don't think there's going to be many people at light featherweight in my categories. So then you get the option to go upper weight category, which would be to under lightweight, under 70. And that's where I'm going to start struggling, because of that weight discrepancy, and you're with higher level guys all the time. It's very, very difficult, mate, So I think if I can stay at that weight category and get matches at that weight category, I think I believe I'll hold my own there. If I start having to have to go up weight categories, then I'll be totally honest about it, I'm going to struggle. I find that like when you get up to like Paddy's weight for me, which is Paddy's around 70, he bounces a couple of kilo over, a couple, down to about 69. I start finding it hard work, especially if they're switched on and they know how to use that little bit extra weight and they're really good. So I think that weight category for me, it's always been a perfect weight category. The under 64, it's always been perfect. So I want to stay there, and I want to get some good comp wins at that weight.
And in terms of your continuing development, are you staying with Konstantinos, or are you just seeing where the journey takes you next?
No, I'll always be with Konstantinos. I've got like so much time for him. Not only is he my mate, he's like my mentor and my coach as well. But I've got so many like good people around me with the BJJ. I got Paddy, like you've met Paddy and we've had him on the podcast. I got Kev Capel, who's over the RAF BJJ team. I'm now down at Southmorton with Simon Swires. He's affiliated to Ashley Williams and all them lot. So there's good connections there. But I think that, I've had my black belt off Konstantinos. When Konstantinos was ill and poorly, I tried my best to help him out as much as I could even though I was working. We kept the gym running. Even through the COVID, I made sure it was my priority to make sure he and the gym was okay. And I think that Konstantinos has always remembered that. So because of the relationship I've got with him and the other guys over in Cyprus, I'm always gonna gravitate to Konstantinos as well. So my dream is to go out there and do some coaching for him and that as well, because he's on about expanding the gym in the future. So but we'll wait and see on that. For me, I'm just happy being on the mats and learning and developing, and I'm enjoying where I am now at Southmorton with Simon.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure you've got many decades of good training ahead of you, Gav. So I think that's covered all the points I had, Gav.
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting stuff there. And
Yeah.
there's points we'll probably revisit in future podcasts. So thank you very much.
No worries, mate. I'll make some notes and we'll go over some subtopics of them topics that we've already covered. Got some really good guests coming up as well. So looking forward to that. I'll just mention the sponsors again. So House of Jiu-Jitsu Cyprus. Thank you very much, Konstantinos, for sponsoring the podcast. Clarity Valeting and Detailing. That's my cousin, Mark Powell. If you need your cars, motorhomes, caravans valeted to a very high spec, please get in touch with him. Kevin Mauer Drive-Thrus. With Kev Griff, they tarmac all your drives, all your patios, stuff like that. So if you need that, get in touch with Kev Griff. Matt Barbershop with Matthew Bottomley. That's in Kevin Mauer. If you need your haircut, very good barber. Get in touch with him. Plenty of experience. Josie's Chippy. So we've got Anthony Joseph. Catch him on Facebook or Instagram. If you want your fish and chips, anything like that, please go down there and get your fish and chips. Sandbach Judo Club with Rob Sadler. So if you're in the area, in Sandbach, Winsford, anywhere like that, and you want to learn some judo, please go and see Rob. The Grappler's Gift with Craig Stanton. That's where I get all my rash guards, gis, everything like that. I'm going to actually get in touch with him to see if he can get me a custom-made black belt now. So, Craig Stanton, spot on lad, ex-military, brilliant. And then we've got Rob Sandler Consulting and Construction. And then Knutsford Jiu-Jitsu Club with Dave Bruff. So if you're in the Knutsford area and you want to do any jiu-jitsu, traditional, groundwork, anything like that, please get in touch with my co-host, Dave Bruff. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
There's a brand new podcast on the scene talking all things martial arts. If you've never seen a podcast, it's a brilliant place to start. So like, subscribe or download to the best thing on the net. Yes, he really is that tiny. Please do not adjust your set. You can watch it on your telly. You can listen on the go. Tell all your friends and family. Tell everyone you know. Feel free to leave a comment. Tune in, give us a share. The only host that I know gets his keys from Build-A-Bear. The Gavin Davis Podcast. The Gavin Davis Podcast. Jump on board, we'll have a real blast on the Gavin Davis Podcast.
like those dry blues ears. Gavin Davis podcast. Gavin Davis podcast. Jump on board, we'll have a real blast.